Thank you all for coming. I think first of all I want to thank Mr. Abdul Aziz from Blue Ocean Academy. Thank you very much for inviting me to, and of course Mr. Najmul Hussain for the inaugural Project Management Leadership Forum. The one thing I want to say, just on the back of what Mr. Najmul said, is that I cannot advise enough to read research articles that have come from the PMI, Pulse of the Profession. There's one that I'll be discussing quite a bit in the panel discussion to come up, and there's another one that it's quite dated, but it's very informational, to put it. It's probably the most accurate way. It was published in 1974, but it looks at implementing projects in emerging economies, and I think you'll find some tremendous advice on how being the PMI is mainly a Western type of project management framework, I guess is probably the best way to put it, and how that can be translated into, say, emerging economies around Asia and the Middle East, because there are some tricky parts to it. So yeah, so what I'm going to be talking about is mega projects and the critical success factors around mega projects. Now, first of all, I think it's probably worth putting into a framework of what is a mega project. I mean, there is a common consensus that it's a very large scale. It's much more complex than the normal projects that perhaps myself as well and many people in the room have managed, hopefully successfully. And one definition that comes up a lot is that they cost, generally the budget is $1 billion or more. Now, just to give you an idea, there are some projects, as you can see there, although I've put it in smaller writing, the Joint Strike Fighter project, that came in at 399 billion. Also, China High-Speed Railway, that came in at 329. So you can see there are projects that are much more than $1 billion. They generally take many years to develop and build. So there's a much longer planning and development and implementation horizon. They generally involve multiple public and private stakeholders. And one characteristic, which Mr. Najmul talked about with the benefits, is that they are transformational. And a lot of them, especially the infrastructure and transportation mega projects, are there to aid in economic competitiveness, which you'll find, especially in the UAE, you find there's a mixture of critical, you've got the nuclear power station that's happening, there's a lot of hard infrastructure, new roads, new bridges, new delays in getting to work is probably one of the best ways to put it. As well as soft infrastructure as well, when we're talking about the legal frameworks. Sometimes mega projects, it actually involves a change in laws and regulations in order for it to be built. So some examples, as I mentioned before, high-speed rail lines, airports, seaports, motorways, hospitals, even Olympic game events when we talk about mega project events, dams, wind farms, offshore oil and gas extraction, new aircraft development, the list is there. So it does cover, it's not just about infrastructure and transportation, it covers a wide range of different industries. And there's one quote that I think, just to begin with, that comes from Mr. Dr. Patrick O'Connell, who is the Director of Major Program Management at Oxford University, and he said, if managers of conventional projects need the equivalent of a driver's license to do what they do, then managers of mega projects need the equivalent of a pilot's jumbo jet license. And just like you wouldn't want someone with a driver's license flying a jumbo jet, you wouldn't want conventional project managers to manage mega projects. They are incredibly complex. There's also, at this point, I think it'd be beneficial to talk about Mr. Bent Flyberg. Has anybody heard of this? Hands in the air. Anybody heard of this gentleman? A few people, fantastic. Well, I think as it's being filmed, it must give credit to this guy, because there's a lot of work in here that comes from his research. He's published over 200 papers and he's written over 10 books, and I highly advise anybody to have a look at it. And he has come up with what's called the iron law of mega projects. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit depressing, perhaps, because the history is not great. However, we'll talk about success factors shortly. He says, based on his research, that was mainly conducted between around the 2014 era, when there was a big increase in mega projects from the early 2000s, that 70 to 90% of mega projects have cost overruns, depending on the project type. 100% of Olympic projects have cost overruns. 96% average cost overrun for hydroelectric dam projects. 40% on all rail projects. The average demand, and this is when we start to talk about the economic benefits of major projects, which is a major driving factor, is 34%. One of the worst ones, I guess you could say, is the Channel Tunnel, where capital costs were 80%, financing was 140%. But what was quite astounding was that the initial revenues of original forecast was only 10%. So what that basically ended up resulting in is a rate of return of minus 14.5%, and the total cost was 17.8 billion to the UK economy. So the one thing that he also found out, which is I think a key fact that everyone here needs to grip, which is that it actually didn't matter, in the actual results were quite insignificant, that it didn't matter about the geographical location. It didn't matter whether the mega project was being built in the Middle East, or whether it was being built in Canada, or the UK, or Australia, or China, or Japan. Regardless of that, and even whether it was the public or private sector, they still found very, very similar issues, major cost overruns. These are some examples. This is the top 10 of mega projects. Number 1 is the Suez Canal, that came in at 1,900% over budget. The Scottish Parliament building in Scotland, 1,600. I'm sure you can read that. I'm happy to forward that on to you, but you can see there are some major cost overruns. And this is what his iron law basically states, that mega projects are over budget, over time, under benefits, over and over again. So with that in mind, there are some projects, mega projects, that are successful, and that's the main reason why I've been brought here to talk about. But before I go into that, there is one particular research paper that is a seminal work that also, as the PMI has also said, it forms one of the founding pillars of the PMBOK Guide and the Project Management Institute, and that is Pinter and Slevins, as well as Prescott, he got involved later, critical success factors. They weren't the first people to talk about it. Boynton and Zamoud were talked about it in 1984, but it was more to do with management information systems. It was published in 1987. 10 critical success factors were established, and in 2009 they achieved the research award from the Project Management Institute. So these are the 10 critical success factors. Project mission, top management support. I'm sure you can read the rest. Now, where things got interesting was in 1988. This is when the authors looked at critical success factors. As you saw, there's 10, but are they all critical? As we all know about project lifecycle phases, when it's the feasibility phase, the planning phase, which is sometimes combined, the implementation phase, the construction phase, the handover phase as well. So are they all critical in each particular project lifecycle? Or maybe some of them will be more critical than others. And this is a direct image from their paper. This is what they came up with in 1988. And can anybody see any pattern? I'm hoping you can see it. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, I'll move on. The two factors that came that were decided to be the most critical in every single project life cycle is the project mission and client. In some cycles, in some project life cycles, it's consultation. In others, it's acceptance. But generally, you have to, as Mr. Najmul was saying, communicate with the client at all times. Some of the themes about the project mission. Previous research emphasizes that project sponsors and clients systematically underestimate the costs and overestimate the benefits during the front-end development of a mega project, which results in huge cost overruns and time overruns and benefit shortfalls. Under the delivery model most commonly used, clients assume that they can identify, I'll repeat that they assume that they can identify all the uncertainties that might impact a mega project at the outset. They freeze the design early stage and use fixed price contracts that transfer the risks and create adversarial relationships with contractors during the execution of a project. Just out of interest, how many people here work in contracting? Can you raise your hands? And do you find that fixed price comes in a lot? Yeah? Okay, good. I'm glad that's the case. Otherwise I'd probably go home. So, as I've painted not the best picture of mega projects, as I said previously, there are some projects that are successful, and that's the main reason that I came here to talk to you about. Now there are many, but one of the most researched really was the British Airways Authority Terminal 5. This came in 3 months under the time schedule. It came in on budget. The economic benefits were that it created 68,000 jobs. It also allowed of course, it was a fantastic expansion to the Heathrow Airport to also assist with the economic competitiveness of London and the UK. And I think, from what I recall, it also allowed them to increase the cost per passenger that was landing. It went from £12.50 up to £24 to £22 because of that. So as you can see, I know that the Dubai Al Airport is the number one busiest in the world, but Heathrow was leading from many, many years before that. So what did they do? That's what I'm here to talk about. Why was it successful? What were the core reasons? What were the critical factors? And the number one thing, and I was talking to a gentleman, I can't see him, I know he's here, but he was asking me a very genuine question. And he said, why is it with everybody that is educated to PMI, and everybody there he is, thank you, hello, how are you? Yeah, I had to think about your question. And he was asking me, it was a very genuine question. And he said, why are they failing? When there's so much knowledge out there, when there's so much information, PMI has been around since 1982. One of the things that they did, and it took 2 years, and they put together a team. It says in the research that all of them had MBAs. That must have been a prerequisite for talent, but nonetheless. But they came from a variety of different industries. Now, of course, they came from previous large international airport projects. A lot of people, according to the research, came from the Hong Kong project that was completed previous to this. But they took people from all different industries. They took people from logistics. They took people that were working with Amazon, people that were used to working in incredibly large supply chains, and they wanted to basically research why the project's failing, which is exactly what they did. They looked at every mega project in the UK over the last 10 years. They also researched every international airport that opened over the last 15 years, as in around the world, not just in England. And this is what you can call reference class forecasting. And it might sound a bit of a fancy name, but what it basically means is that you look at lessons learned. You look back in the past. You've got this mega project that you're looking to implement. More than likely the government has a mega project that they're looking to implement. And it's so critical to the economy, they cannot allow, it's just critical that it does not overrun by time or by budget. So what did they do? They looked. And the two things that they found many things, and I've only got 25 minutes, so I can't tell you everything, but the two prime things that they found were fixed price contracts and transferring risk to the contractor. Those are the two major issues they found with all projects over the last 10 years, and the whole range of different projects, infrastructure, not just airports, and the last 15 years of international airports openings in the world. So it's interesting that a lot of you are experiencing fixed price contracts. Dynamic capability. That is the main strategic project management framework that they decided to implement. They researched the projects, and you're talking about highly intelligent people with all manner of acronyms behind their name, and decades, hundreds of years possibly of experience, and they realized that no matter what they do, they cannot guarantee everything that's going to happen. They can't. There's so much uncertainty, there's so much high risk in the project that they cannot use fixed costs. So they use a dynamic capability. And there's there's one quote that I quite like, is that adapting to uncertainty is the most challenging aspect in delivering mega projects, because they're generally very, very high risk over long time horizons. So these are the 5 critical success factors that they use. Now these have been used in other projects as well, mainly Crossrail. The Olympic Games in the UK 2012, they also use very similar. Now these, before I start on this, I'm sure that you will look at it and there may be one, maybe all, that you'll feel, you know what, I need that on my project. And I can strongly advise you to research into the particular one. Take notes, you've all got paper in front of you on the one that you feel is the most critical. So the first thing they did, as I mentioned about reference class forecasting, is search capability, the front end planning of the project to forecast uncertainties. As I said, every mega project is unique, therefore a search for new or successful ideas, practices, technologies and other projects can be adapted and modified, combined to create a delivery model or project governance to achieve that project mission. The second one is adaptive problem solving. And here we start to talk about innovation, because it is impossible to be able to determine all the potential scenarios that that will happen, that will occur on a mega project. And I think we all know that. I'm sure a lot of us experience that even in the smaller projects that we work on. So in order to do that, as well as the project changing, you also have client requirements that can change as well, mainly during execution. You know, projects generally go, although there are 4 project phases, really, that's more of a micro kind of outlook. If you look at it from a macro point of view, there's really only 2. And there is the concept phase, and then there is the reality phase. And it is that point when it switches, that when all the planning and the design and everything that's been arranged on the project then needs to be put into practice. And that's where these critical success factors really come in, during that switch. So having flexible contracts and team structures, this is what they did. Cost plus, cost reimbursable contracts as well. Now there's one thing that, as I've mentioned contracts, fixed cost, although they found it was the major problem causing these issues with the mega projects, it's actually, and this is where I go more into my opinion from my research, it is the gold standard of projects. You want fixed cost, but the only way to get a fixed cost project, really, to truly get a fixed cost contract, is to be able to determine all the uncertainties on the project. And because that's so difficult, even on smaller projects that we work on mega projects, it really is near to impossible. So really we're looking at an agreement. That was their strategy, that builds trust and collaboration instead of adversarial relationships. The the Panama Canal was an interesting development that was completed a couple of years ago. The original contract for that, the winning contractor bid $1 billion lower than Bechtel. I'm sure we've all heard Bechtel, the big American contractor, oil and gas. $1 billion lower. The client loved this. $1 billion, I mean, you cannot almost refuse that saving. What happens, of course, and this goes into another talk that I'm adapting, that I don't quite have the time to talk about here, is the fixed price or low bid strategy and then sue later. And that is kind of what happened with this. Due to that potential cost saving that the client saw, they won the contract, $3.5 billion. 6 months later, they submitted a variation for $1.6 billion. How many contractors here do that? Don't even raise your hands. I know that's the modern strategy, because the one thing that I spent 2 very painful years doing my masters in project management, and the driving factor, because I've worked on projects, I know all the pains that everyone goes through here. I wanted to really get down to the root cause. Why is it happening? And it's a different talk, and I'm more than happy to talk with anyone afterwards about it, but I did come up with some interesting results. So number 3 is test and trial. If there's something that you don't know on the project, then you can either proceed with it and take the risk, which is exceptionally high risk, or you do a trial. And this is what happened with the Terminal 5 project. One particular square, I'm actually suffering from a bit of flu, so my apologies. So one of the things that they did is they looked at the roof. The roof was potentially going to be a big problem. I'm MEP myself, but you have to excuse my lack of civil terminology, but basically there were 150 gaps between structural columns on the roof. And they didn't really quite know how it was going to work, or even how they're going to install it. And let's not forget, they're working on one of the busiest airports in the world. So the last thing they can do is cause any disruption to the current operations, the current planes landing. So they actually constructed it off-site to learn, and they found that there was 140 different potential safety factors, and they found many, many different innovative ways that they could say, right, well, we've done it now, so when it comes to actually building it on the site, we know what we're doing. They face some issues still, obviously, because you're going from concept to reality, but it worked. So trials of new technology as well, as we're all, I'm sure, aware that digital infrastructure and there's various software platforms that are starting to infiltrate into project management. Now, some of these are new, they're new practices, they're new, they've been untested, so you can implement these off-site before you bring them to the actual mega project, which is exactly what they did. The next one is strategic innovation. What challenges to pursue to actually achieve the goals of the mega project? To call on and this is the most important one that I found, is they called on the entire project supply chain capability and expertise. There were so many contractors, there were so many suppliers, there were so many experts involved in the project that what they wanted to do was get them all together in a team, and that's what they did. And we'll talk about risk a bit later, but and what they did, they used it, as I said here, they used a digital infrastructure platform in order to coordinate these ideas. But they also offered incentives and rewards, bonuses. I know it's worked on a few projects here, but it's still very early days, but it does work. And it encouraged the contractors and suppliers to commit the resources to address the challenges, to develop the ideas. As I said in the beginning of this, there were so many uncertainties on the project, they couldn't use fixed cost. It was just impossible. They knew that there would be a cost overrun. And strategic balancing. This one I found, this is my personal favorite, because ultimately a mega project does consist of many smaller projects and phases that need to be completed. Some activities can be predictable, some can be standardized and repetitive. For example, you might have a mega project that's happening, but if a very good geological survey is done, you might find that the foundation work, the piles and all the shoring and the raft, depending on the project obviously, I'm talking about construction and infrastructure, might not be as complex as other parts, say the roof of the project. So you can balance out the two, and of course this comes back to communicating it with the client, that yes, you could use fixed cost in this area, but this particular area, it's so high risk, it's novel, it's new, it's not actually, if you use reference class forecasting, it's not been done on a project before. So I advise we use a test and trial, and we use a different contract for that. It actually happened on the Olympic Games, as I'm here and I have the microphone. The velodrome roof, the contractor was ISG. Now their original contract was a cost plus, but they reviewed the design and they're experts in what they do, and they found a different way to install the roof, to build the roof, and they renegotiated their contract, and it went from cost plus to fixed cost because they knew that they could save the client money, so they took the risk. So you can see there's strategic balancing in mega projects just because of the pure size of it. Strategic balancing is also known as targeted flexibility. It's that balance between routine and innovative action. Obviously depending on whether the condition is stable and certain. So just to highlight, these are the 5 critical success factors. And I'll be happy to share this information if anybody wants to take it back with them to look into. And I think what I would end with is that generally the traditional approach to deliver mega projects, just as Nazmur was saying, with disruption in the markets and benefits and different ways of working, it's no longer viable, as the history can clearly show you. A highly adaptable model based on collaboration, flexible contracts, integrated project teams, and innovation is required. Thank you.